Hi there, welcome to my channel. My name is Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Arts. Today we're going to have a little bit of fun with a unicorn and some scraps. And here is what we're going to be making today. It's so cute, I can't wait to share it with you. My scrap bin is pretty full right now, so I just kind of dumped it out. I wanted to see what I had, and here you can see it too. It's kind of a big mess. In addition to the scraps, I'm going to be using this percale 200 thread count sheet. It's one sheet. I got it at an estate sale for $5. And I'm also going to be using, for the first time, this roll of bias tape that I got online. Here's a closer look at that bias tape. It's 1 inch wide, but it is folded over twice. It's cut on the bias, so when they pressed it, it makes a curve. My plan with this sheet is to cut it into 12.5 inch squares, and I'm going to use that as a foundation for scrappy blocks. First, I took a little time and cut all the elastic off of this fitted sheet, and then I cut the 4 corner seams out. I tried to fold this up and cut out my 12.5 inch squares, but it was so wrinkly. I mean, it was really wrinkly. It's been in a package for probably 50 years. So I decided to go ahead and press it and then cut my 12.5 inch squares. I also thought it was funny, this sheet is so old, the inspector number is stamped on the sheet itself. Once I had it pressed good enough to cut 12 inch squares, I folded it over into fourths, and then I started cutting my 12 inch squares out. This one full-size sheet gave me about 30 12.5 inch squares. Then I also had some odd leftover sides that were not 12.5 inches. I cut those into 5 inch by 10 inch, and then I divided those in half to make some charm squares. Well, let's get started with this scrap block. So the first thing I'm doing is using this 12.5 inch square as a foundation. I'm taking 2 scraps, putting them right sides together, sort of in the middle. I'm not really measuring or really planning too much. I just know I want to sew a few scraps about 1 inch or 2 wide in a curve shape. That's really my only plan so far, is to make a curve on this fabric. Once I trimmed off the excess thread, I pressed that open with my fingers. Then I just grabbed another scrap and sewed it to the prior scraps. To make my curve, you can see the way I'm lining these 2 fabric scraps. They're overlapping on one side, so that will create the curve shape when I fold it open. Once I made it all the way to the edge of my square, I went back to the center and started going the other way, still making that curve. Then I started making curve number 2. I just kept a small, about a 1/4 inch space between the 2 sets of curves. We're going to cover that space up later. About halfway through making that first curve, it occurred to me I did not need to break thread every single time. So at that point, I started stitching a piece of fabric on, and then instead of breaking the thread, I just turned the fabric around 180 degrees and just pulled out a little extra thread, moved my needle over, and stitched on the next scrap. This went way, way faster than breaking thread every time. Once I finished those 2 curves, I wanted to do something a little different, so I started sewing some strips on. And you can see I'm kind of cutting them at an angle once I get them stitched on so that it follows that curve. Then I added 2 strips going the opposite way, and that looked pretty cute too. Last, I had a large 1/4 circle space. Well, I had these unicorns as a scrap, and I thought, I'm going to put a unicorn right there. So I simply cut the curve on that unicorn, and I just stitched all the way around the outside of this block just to kind of hold everything down. Now it's time to have some fun with this bias tape. I cut the 3 pieces that I needed to the right length. I took this to the sewing machine, and the first seam I stitched close to the inner edge, or the smaller part of the curve. Next, I flipped it around the opposite way, and I stitched the other side of that bias tape, just using a straight stitch, about 1/8 of an inch seam. I repeated this with the second bias tape piece, and this is definitely covering up all those raw edges of my strips and scraps. I decided I had enough room in the middle of this bias tape to go down the middle of these bias tape pieces with a decorative stitch. I'm going to be making more scrap blocks out of this sheet and scraps and bias tape. As you know, when I started this, I had no idea how it was going to end up. I'm really pleased with it, and I really cannot wait to get started on more of these scrappy blocks and see what this interesting scrap quilt is going to look like when it's all finished. What I want to leave you with is don't be afraid to just start sewing and see what happens. You just never know, but everything we make with our beautiful fabrics is going to be lovely, and someone is going to love this. If you're enjoying my content, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified when I post new videos. Thanks so much for stopping by today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.